Fitness categories, that gets a little bit trickier. You could look into things like VO2 max, which also they can predict longevity based on that. You can even predict when someone can no longer live independently based on your VO2 max. Now, that you don't have to go to an exercise science lab and wear a mask and all that stuff. There's actually some tests that you can do that will give you an approximation of your VO2 max. And with that, I actually have a program you can get for free on my website that gives you some of those tests that you can do to learn a little bit more about that. And then some other tests to look at your height to waist ratio, right? Your height should be at least double your waist size in terms of body composition is probably one of the strongest numbers that they found. And then in terms of where you're at, and
if I can
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Your height to your waist size should be
yes. Yes.
Okay, so I have to process that. Okay, got that. All right, that makes sense. So obviously,
Yes.
if your waist is more than your BMI, which I think is what's your thoughts on BMI, by the way? Because
it's an outdated metric that doesn't really work that well. That's why the height to waist ratio is gold.
okay, that's good. That's good. So many people I run into say, hey, I'm obese or this or that. I'm like, don't go by BMI at this point. Okay. So
no, and even body fat, I've moved away. I have body fat calipers and I have access to things where you can get body fat, and I don't even use that much unless I'm working with an athlete. I just tell people get an old fashioned, cloth tape measure and measure your waist, measure, depending male or female, you're going to, males, I'll measure waist, chest, arm, and thigh. Females, I'll measure waist, arm, thigh, and hips, and just use those as your best gauge for your improvement because the scale is not going to tell you that. And so that's some of your body composition measures. And then I'll give you one more test because we talked about kind of the big three and talking about, sleep is a little tougher unless you have some metrics other than just doing a journal. Nutrition is your health, and your blood markers are going to kind of tell that story as well as your body composition. In terms of stress, that's a little bit trickier. Okay. Stress impacts our autonomic nervous system. All right. This fight or flight or rest and recover. And ideally we want to be able to kind of balance more towards that parasympathetic side, the rest and recover versus the sympathetic. Well, if you're over stressed, you're going to be more sympathetically driven. So one quick window into that is looking at your breathing and do a breath hold test. So if you just sit up tall, hands on your lap, take 3 natural breaths, and at the end of your third exhale, pinch and hold your nose and just run a timer and see how long you can hold your breath. Now, you should be able to hold it for at least 20 seconds. If you can't, that tells me your RPMs are running a little hot, right? That you are someone who's a little stressed, because what's causing us to want to breathe is a stress response. So the more calm state you're in, the longer you will be able to hold that. So for when I have somebody come in and I've had people hold it for 7 seconds, 8 seconds, that's someone who's super, super stressed. And so exercise the stress. I got to be really careful what I do with this person. And it's not a static measure. You want to look at it from one day to the next, and you can see changes in kind of what your readiness is for that day. And it's amazing what you'll see impact it. Sleep will impact it. I had one client, I always tell a story, very mild-mannered guy, always has a breath hold of like 40 seconds plus. One day I see him at the window before a session, and he's very animated on the phone. And he comes in, he's like, my effing partner, and he got in a fight on the phone with his partner. He does breath hold. It's like 15 seconds just because he was revving so high. So it's a little window into where your stress levels are and how you're managing that. So take that whole battery, and that kind of gives me an idea to find out where your sweet spot is. Where do I need to even start? Where's the leak in your bucket? And we start there.
Body doesn't lie. Those are great tests, and I hope that our listeners do go and do these. I'm going to go and do them because I'm curious to see how I'm doing. Eric, what is one fitness myth, especially in our 50s, that you just wish were not a thing?
There's a bunch of them. I think probably the biggest thing, and this was reinforced last week with a story I just told on a post I just had. Is I went to my dentist, and there was a new hygienist there who I'd never met, and she asked what I did. When I told her, I always kind of say it begrudgingly because I never know what's going to come out next. And she reinforced that fear, Kelly, and that she said, "Oh, I worked with a trainer once. I couldn't walk for 2 weeks after we did legs." And my first thought is, okay, this woman is like, this wasn't like someone who's a competitive bodybuilder, or this wasn't somebody who's like a CrossFit competitor. This is like this sweet, like maybe very casual exerciser. Why is she doing a bodybuilding leg workout? Right. So the fact that unfortunately, and being a former bodybuilder myself, I get it. And thank God for Arnold Schwarzenegger making fitness become part of our lexicon. But because of that, a lot of what we do in fitness today is biased based on bodybuilding. And so, look, bodybuilding is a very, very unique niche sport, right? Very few people come to me and they say, I need to go stand on stage in my underwear in front of a panel of judges who are going to make sure I'm perfect, right? That's essentially what the sport is. And so unless I tell everybody, unless you're going to go stand on stage in your underwear, the panel of judges making sure you're perfect, we don't need to train like that. And so that training does work. It's very effective if you want that end result. But realize that there's a couple prices that you pay with that. One is because you need so much volume of training, it's incredibly taxing, and you can expect to be sore all the time. When I competed in bodybuilding, I was never not sore. It just changed throughout the week where I was sore. And then two is that you need a lot of time. When I was in my 20s and competed, I could do it. But if I plan a 4-day workout split for you, and something comes up where you got to drive your kids somewhere, Mark, or you have a business meeting or something like that, and you don't get day 4, well, guess what? You have now body parts that don't get seen for 2 weeks that are going to get overlooked. And so because of that, and because it used to kind of be a badge of courage to walk around with your legs sore when you were 20, it ain't cool when you're 45. And I got to take my kids to soccer practice, and I got to get on a flight, and I got to walk through the airport. Like, it's not cool anymore to be sore all the time. And so I never, unless someone has a very specific physique goal, never program anything but full body workouts. You should know you did something the next day, but you should never be that sore where it's going to impact your function.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of my workouts have progressed towards what I call full body workouts, which is what you have suggested, and or you suggest to your clients. And one, just for time purposes, I don't want to be at the damn gym all day long. Number two, I just find, I'm more productive by getting stuff done between an hour and an hour less, and I'd rather do it that way. So we were talking about sore. Let's shift and let's talk about the process of recovery. I think that's a big topic we could speak on here. What works? I mean, you got plunges, you got saunas, you got peptides, so we can go down a lot of rabbit holes at this point, but I'm curious to what you're utilizing now with clients that's working for recovery, because that's a big one.
Yeah, work big, work your way in. What do I mean by that? So I use the analogy, there's a great story about a college professor who talked about the jar of life, right? He takes out a jar, puts it on his desk, and he fills it up with these big rocks. And he says, is the jar full? And class says, yeah, it looks full. And then he takes some pebbles out and fills in the space between the big rocks and says, is it now full? And they said, well, yeah, I guess it's full. And then he takes sand and he fills in the space and it fills in there. And his analogy was that's how we should approach life. And the big rocks are your family, the people close to you is the people you love, and your pebbles is your profession and so forth. And then the sand is kind of the little things. And because then what you do is you empty out the jar and put all the sand in first. And when you do that, you have no room for the other stuff. And that's how it's kind of a great, kind of way to look at life, that if you get caught up in the minutia, you'll miss out on the big stuff. Well, the same goes for training, in that I got to look at the big rocks. How are you sleeping? What does your nutrition look like? Okay. And how are you managing your stress? Those are the big three before we ever worry about plunges or saunas or any of those things. If those things are relatively in order, then what we're going to do is, in terms of recovery, understand that your recovery starts before your sweat dries. And the first thing that most people skip out on, that I highly encourage, is a good 2 to 5 minute cool down at the end of your workout. That jump starts that recovery. It starts to put you, because you just went into this sympathetic overdrive of training, of stress, creating inflammation. Great. That's what we want to have. But now let's start to down, I don't want you huffing and puffing, swinging your keys on the finger, walking out the door. I'm going to maybe put you in some sort of yoga pose or do some sort of mobility drill, or just have you even lay on your back and just do some deep breathing, focusing on super long exhales for 2 to 5 minutes, and have you just completely walk out at a lower heart rate than you walked in at. That jump starts the recovery process. Now from there, depending on what your goals are, I'm not going to have you cold plunge anywhere too close to when you worked out, because it will act, because what does it do? It cuts back inflammation. Well, that's not good if part of the inflammation process is part of what builds muscle. And so I kind of have to let that run its course. I don't want to interrupt it with an ice bath. So, and then also I don't want to have an ice bath right before, or anywhere close to bedtime, because the ice bath is stimulating. It's a sympathetic thing. So if you're going to do it first thing in the morning, make sure it's a couple hours away from any type of strength training you do, and it can certainly have some value, especially if you're involved in any kind of activity or sport. Afterwards, it can dull the sensation of some of the post, competition soreness. Heat is phenomenal. The research on sauna just keeps getting better. If you have access to one, use it as best you can. Research shows probably about an hour total per week is great. However you break that up is fantastic. Nutritionally, protein is number one by far, without even a close second. Making sure you're getting enough protein in throughout the day, and for most people, that's gonna be somewhere close to a gram per pound of body weight, or somewhere in that neighborhood. If you tell people that, they're probably going to fall a little short. But if I set that as a marker, they're just going to naturally boost up their protein more. And then from there, it's hydration, and all the other stuff will support that, but it won't replace that.